My name is Rachel. At Thanksgiving dinner, 3 years after my grandmother moved back from Portland, she set down her fork mid-bite, looked directly at me across the table, and asked, "Sweetheart, whatever happened to the bakery your father left you? The one on Elm Street with the big front window?" Before I could say a single word, my mother laughed softly and said, "Oh, that place belongs to Derek now. We thought it made more sense for the family." My father's chair, the one nobody had sat in since the funeral, seemed to go very cold. Grandmother didn't blink. She folded her napkin once, placed it beside her plate, and smiled the quietest, most deliberate smile I had ever seen on her face. "Finish eating," she said. "Then I'd like everyone to take a drive with me." My heart hit the floor. For 2 years, my mother had been texting me almost every other week. "Just a small loan, Rachel. Derek's going through something." I always sent the money. I thought I still owned the bakery. I had no idea the real truth had been sitting in a county records office for 14 months, waiting for someone to look. The bakery had always been more my father's heartbeat than his business. He opened it the year I was born, a narrow storefront on Elm Street in Millbrook, with creaky hardwood floors, a hand-painted sign above the door, and a front window so wide the whole block could smell cinnamon rolls by 7 in the morning. He named it after my grandmother's maiden name, Harlow's. Everyone in town knew it. Growing up, I spent every Saturday morning behind that counter, learning how to pipe frosting and count change and talk to customers like they were the most important people in the world. My father used to say that if you treated a bakery customer right, you had a friend for life. When he died a heart attack on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after his 58th birthday, the will was simple and clear. The house in Millbrook went to my mother. The savings account was split equally between my brother and me. And Harlow's Bakery, the building he had paid off 15 years ago and the business he had spent his whole adult life building, went entirely to me. The will said I was the one who had the passion for it. His exact words. I was 27. I had been working as a pastry chef at a hotel in Cincinnati for 2 years, building experience before coming home to run the place properly. The plan was always to come back. My father knew that. He and I had talked about it dozens of times, sketching ideas on napkins, a small events catering arm, a second location someday, a proper espresso bar, replacing the old drip machine. The bakery was the thread we had always planned to pull together when the time was right. After the funeral, I asked my mother if she could keep the doors open with the existing staff while I finished out my contract in Cincinnati. 3 months, I said. Just let Maria and the other girls run things the way they always have. I'll be back in the fall and we'll figure it out properly. My mother cried and said, "Of course." She said family takes care of family. She said she was proud of me for honoring my commitments. My brother called 2 weeks later. He had just been laid off from his 3rd job in 4 years, something vague in sales that had never quite worked out. He was living in Columbus in an apartment he couldn't really afford, and he had a voice on the phone that had always worked on me since we were kids this low. Earnest thing that made whatever he was asking sound completely reasonable. "Rachel, I just need somewhere to land. Let me help Mom run the bakery while you finish in Cincinnati. I'll keep it warm for you. A few months, I promise." I thought about the napkin sketches. I thought about our father. I said yes. I came home in October to a bakery I barely recognized. My brother had repainted the interior without asking anyone, covering the soft cream walls my father had chosen in a dark gray that felt cold and modern and wrong. The handwritten chalkboard menu was gone, replaced with a printed laminated sheet. The front display case had been rearranged. The signature cinnamon rolls pushed to the side to make room for pre-made pastries from a commercial supplier my father had specifically refused to use. When I asked Maria, who had been with us for 11 years, what had happened, she pulled me aside and said quietly that she was thinking of looking for another job. That said enough. My brother was there every morning. He arrived late, left early, spent most of the time in the back office on his phone, and introduced himself to new vendors as the owner. When I corrected him the first time, he laughed and said I was being uptight. When I corrected him in front of a vendor the second time, he stopped speaking to me for a week. My mother called that evening and asked me not to humiliate my brother in public. "He's trying, Rachel. He lost his dad too." I let it go. That was my first mistake, and I made it so many times it stopped feeling like a mistake and started feeling like just the way things were. The months turned. My brother settled into the back office like it had always been his. He hired 2 of his friends to replace staff who quit, neither of whom knew anything about baking. He started ordering equipment on the business account, a commercial espresso machine I had been saving toward myself, new shelving, a point-of-sale system with a monthly subscription fee that ate quietly into the margins. Every time I raised a concern, my mother mediated, which in practice meant she agreed with him and asked me to be patient. "You're the business brain," she would say. "Help him. That's what your father would have wanted." The texts started around month 6. My brother needed coverage for a payroll shortfall. "Just until the holiday rush, Rachel." Then it was a supplier invoice that had slipped through. Then a repair to the walk-in cooler that turned into a surprisingly large bill. I transferred the money each time, because the bakery was in my name, and if it went under on me. I kept telling myself I was protecting my own asset. I was wrong about what I was protecting. I found out the way you find out about most things you should have caught sooner by accident. On a quiet Sunday morning, when I sat down to file quarterly taxes and pulled up the county assessor's website to confirm the property details. The bakery building had always been straightforward. Paid off, no mortgage, clean title. I had checked once the year after my father died and never looked again. The name on the record was Derek James Whitfield. My brother. Transfer date, 14 months earlier. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my mother, voice very steady, and asked her to explain. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did when she was expecting a call she didn't want to take. She said it was nothing to worry about. She said my brother needed something in his name to qualify for a small business loan. She said it was a temporary administrative thing, just paperwork, and that she had handled it with a notary from the church, who did these things all the time as a favor to the congregation. "You didn't ask me," I said. "You were busy in Cincinnati," she said, "and it's still the family business." I went to the county records office the next morning and asked for everything on file. The clerk was polite and efficient. She set a folder in front of me, and I sat at the narrow table along the wall and read through it 3 times because the first 2 times I couldn't fully absorb what I was seeing. The deed transfer was dated 11 months after my father's funeral. My signature was on the 3rd page, a signature that looked close enough to mine at a glance, but fell apart under any real attention. The loops were off. The way I formed the capital R, with a slight backward lean I've had since 7th grade, was missing entirely. The notary seal belonged to a man named Gerald Foss. I looked him up on my phone right there at the counter. Gerald Foss was an elder at my mother's church who had been over for Sunday dinner 4 times since my father died. Below the deed transfer was a loan document. My brother had taken a mortgage against the paid-off building for $140,000, signed 6 months ago. The bank statements attached showed disbursements to a company called Bright Path Holdings, LLC. I searched that on my phone, too. My brother had filed the LLC registration 9 months ago, his home address in Columbus, his name as sole officer. I drove home in silence and sat in my father's driveway for almost an hour. That evening, I texted my grandmother. She was living in Millbrook again by then, had been for 3 years, in the small house she kept after my grandfather passed. She was 71, clear-eyed, and the kind of person who read everything twice and threw nothing away. I didn't tell her everything in the text. I just asked if I could come by. She replied within 2 minutes. "Come now. I have coffee on." She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need you to tell me one thing. Did you ever sign anything related to that property after your father's will was filed?" I said no. She nodded slowly, the way she did when she was confirming something she already suspected, and said, "Good. Now let me make a call." That was on a Wednesday. By Friday, she had spoken to my uncle in Boston, her younger brother, who had spent 30 years as a real estate attorney before retiring to do exactly what he wanted, which was fish and read legal thrillers. He drove down on Saturday morning in a truck that was older than I was, shook my hand, and set a yellow legal pad on my grandmother's kitchen table like he was about to try the most important case of his career. In some ways, I think he felt like he was. My uncle spent 2 hours going through the documents I had pulled, making notes in a handwriting so small I couldn't read it from across the table. Then he sat back, folded his hands, and spoke very plainly. "The deed transfer is fraudulent," he said. The signature is a forgery. The notarization is almost certainly improper. A notary who witnesses a signature for a family friend where a conflict of interest exists. This obvious is looking at losing his commission at minimum. The mortgage taken against the forged deed attached to your brother's name, not yours. Once the deed is voided, the bank's claim against the property falls with it. Your brother and anyone who participated in the fraud, including whoever helped prepare those documents, are personally liable. He tapped the bank statement. This LLC he set up. The disbursements. I'd want a forensic accountant to look at where that money actually went. But on the surface, it looks like he used a fraudulent mortgage on property he didn't own to fund something he didn't disclose. That's not just a civil matter. My grandmother poured 3 cups of coffee and sat down. How long? She asked him. If we file Monday, we could have an emergency injunction to stop any further encumbrances within the week. Full quiet title action, maybe 8 to 10 months if he contests it. He'll contest it. I asked the same question I had asked myself all night. What does this cost? My uncle looked at me over his coffee cup. Your father was good to this family for 30 years, he said. Sit down and let me work. We filed 2 complaints Monday morning in county court, a quiet title action to void the fraudulent deed transfer, and a separate fraud claim naming my brother, my mother, and Gerald Foss, the notary, as defendants. My uncle handled the legal work. I hired a local litigation attorney named Sandra Webb, who specialized in real estate fraud cases, and who told me in our first meeting that she had seen this exact pattern a dozen times. It's almost always a sibling, she said, not unkindly. And it's almost always enabled by a parent who thinks keeping the peace is the same as doing the right thing. The calls started the same afternoon the papers were served. My mother called 11 times in 2 hours. She left voicemails that moved through every emotional register, tears first, then soft guilt, then something that tried to sound like reason. Your brother has nothing, Rachel. He has nowhere to go. Your father would be devastated. You're burning the family down over paperwork. I listened to the first 3 and stopped listening after that. My brother sent texts that alternated between apologies and threats in a pattern I recognized from childhood. I'm so sorry, I panicked. I'll fix everything. Then, an hour later, you'll regret this when you're alone at 40 with no one. I blocked both numbers on the same evening and felt a strange, hollow calm settle in my chest. My grandmother changed her phone number, just in case. Discovery took 9 months. Sandra subpoenaed bank records, LLC filings, text messages between my brother and my mother, emails between my mother and Gerald Foss. The paper trail that came back was worse than I had imagined and exactly as bad as Sandra had predicted. There were text messages from my mother to my brother the week before the deed transfer, coaching him through what to say to the notary. There was an email from my brother to Gerald Foss with a scanned copy of my actual signature from a birthday card I had sent my mother 2 years before, a birthday card used as a reference to forge my name on a legal document. There were transfers from my brother's LLC account into a sports betting platform totaling $62,000 over 8 months. The remaining $80,000 had gone toward a truck, furniture for his Columbus apartment, and what the bank statements described only as miscellaneous vendor payments that Sandra's forensic accountant traced to a cash advance scheme he had been running with one of the friends he'd hired at the bakery. The handwriting expert we hired examined the forged signature for 2 days and produced a 16-page report identifying 19 distinct differences between my actual signature and the forgery. When she presented her findings in court, the defense attorney objected 4 times. The judge overruled all 4 objections and asked the defense counsel, with visible impatience, whether he had reviewed the report prior to the hearing. Gerald Foss accepted a plea agreement 3 weeks before trial. He surrendered his notary commission, paid a civil fine, and gave a sworn deposition confirming that my mother had contacted him directly and that he had notarized the document without my presence, relying on a verbal assurance from her that I had already signed it in private and was unavailable. His commission was gone before the ink dried on the plea. My brother showed up to every hearing in a dark hoodie, phone in his hand, talking quietly to a cut-rate attorney who changed his strategy 3 times before trial and ultimately advised him to settle. My brother refused to settle. He had convinced himself, I think, that the family connection would mean something in that room, that a judge would look at the situation and see a complicated family matter instead of a fraud. The judge did not see a complicated family matter. On a gray February morning, she read the ruling from the bench in a courtroom that was very quiet except for the heat clicking through the old radiators along the wall. Plaintiff Rachel Ann Whitfield is hereby declared the sole and rightful owner of the property known as Harlow's Bakery, located at 114 Elm Street, Millbrook. The deed transfer recorded 14 months prior, purporting to convey title to defendant Derek James Whitfield, is declared void from the moment of recording due to forgery. The mortgage lien recorded against the fraudulent deed is extinguished as against plaintiff's title. Defendant Derek Whitfield is ordered to vacate the premises within 30 calendar days. Defendants are jointly and severally liable for plaintiff's legal fees and documented damages. The matter of criminal referral for forgery and fraud is referred to the District Attorney's Office for review. That last sentence, the criminal referral, was the one Sandra had pushed for. Forgery of a real estate deed is a felony in this state. The district attorney opened an investigation 6 weeks later. My brother hired a criminal defense attorney with money he didn't have. My mother retained her own counsel. Gerald Foss had already cooperated. The DA's office moved deliberately and, from what Sandra told me, confidently. My mother sent one email to an address she found through a mutual cousin, 3 weeks after the ruling. It said that she had nowhere to live, that my brother was facing charges, that I had destroyed what was left of our family, and that she hoped I was proud of myself. I read it once, forwarded it to Sandra as documentation, and deleted it. I stood in the doorway of Harlow's the morning after the eviction order took effect. My brother had left the night before, no warning. No conversation, taking the espresso machine he had bought on the business account and leaving everything else in a condition that took my breath away for a moment before I decided it wasn't going to take anything else from me. Dark gray paint I hadn't chosen. Commercial display cases pushed against the wrong walls. The front window, that wide, beautiful front window, half blocked by a shelving unit someone had bolted directly into the original hardwood floor. I stood there for a while. Then I opened every window and let the February air come through, cold and clean, and I started making a list. The contractors came the following week. New flooring where the old boards had been damaged, soft cream paint that matched my father's original choice as closely as I could find, the shelving unit unbolted and the window opened back up to the street. Maria came back. She said she had been hoping I would call. 2 of the other original staff members came back with her. I rehired them all at better rates than they had been making before, and made Maria the floor manager with a title that matched the work she had always been doing anyway. The cinnamon rolls went back in the center of the display case where they belonged. My uncle filed the paperwork to have the LLC dissolved and the fraudulent mortgage formally extinguished from the property record. He also filed a separate civil claim against my brother for the business losses during his time at the bakery, the supplier contracts he had broken, the staff turnover costs, the revenue decline during the months when the quality had quietly slipped and the regulars had quietly started going elsewhere. That case settled 8 months later. My brother paid a fraction of what he owed in exchange for a payment plan he will probably not keep. Sandra said that was the realistic outcome and that the criminal case mattered more. The DA filed charges 6 months after the ruling. My brother was indicted on 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud. My mother was charged as an accessory. Gerald Foss's cooperation was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. The trial is still pending as I write this, but Sandra told me last week that the DA is confident, and I have learned to trust Sandra's read on things. What I have not learned to do is grieve what I thought my family was, because I am not sure that family ever fully existed outside of the version I needed to believe in. My mother enabled my brother his entire life and told herself she was protecting him. My brother took everything that was available to take and told himself he deserved it. I sent money and made excuses and kept the peace and told myself I was being a good daughter, a good sister, keeping the thread of something intact. The thread was not holding anything together. It was just keeping me in place while they took what they wanted. My grandmother and my uncle came for the reopening in April. My uncle wore a tie that had fish on it and ate 3 cinnamon rolls and told me it was the best morning he'd had in years. My grandmother sat at the small table near the front window where my father used to do his bookkeeping on Sunday mornings, wrapped both hands around a coffee mug, and looked out at Elm Street while the spring light came through the glass. "Your father chose this window on purpose," she said. "He told me he wanted every person who walked past to be able to see in. He said a bakery with nothing to hide doesn't need curtains." I thought about all the things I had tried not to see for 2 years. The paperwork I hadn't checked. The texts I had answered without asking harder questions. The number of times I had told myself that keeping my brother comfortable was the same as keeping my father's memory alive. It wasn't the same. It was never the same. Some people will tell you that family loyalty is unconditional. They usually mean that your loyalty to them should be unconditional, not the other way around. Real loyalty is not silence when someone does you wrong. It is not money transferred without receipts, or questions swallowed to keep the dinner table peaceful, or a signature forged on a document while you are 400 miles away trusting people who have already decided what to do with what is yours. Real loyalty does not require you to make yourself smaller, to make someone else more comfortable. The bakery closes at 4 on Sundays. After close, I sit at that table near the front window with a coffee I make myself, the good kind my father always kept for after hours, and I look out at the street while the light changes. The sign above the door says Harlow's in the same lettering my father painted 30 years ago, touched up now but not changed. The front window is clear all the way to the sidewalk. There is nothing in this place left to hide. My grandmother still visits every few weeks. She always orders the cinnamon roll, always eats it slowly, always tells me it is exactly right. Last time she left, she stopped at the door, turned back, and said what she says at the end of every visit, the same thing she used to say in cards she sent when I was away at culinary school. The same 7 words I have kept with me longer than any other thing she has ever given me. You were always worth fighting for. I think I am finally starting to believe her.